Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to your health and well-being, featuring interviews with experts about nutrition, physical and mental health, and my 5-minute food fact series. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host, a lawyer turned nutritionist, with a deep curiosity to learn about living a healthy, active and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, and sharing what I learn with you here on this podcast. Before I introduce today's guest, I will mention that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to treat, cure or prevent any injuries or medical conditions, and it's never a substitute, of course, for advice from your own health professionals. Today, it is my pleasure to be here with Associate Professor Tim Windsor, who's at the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work at Flinders University here in South Australia. Tim's areas of research interest include changes in activity engagement, social behaviour, emotional regulation and cognition that occur during adulthood and ageing, and he's also interested in psychosocial characteristics such as control beliefs and a sense of purpose that contribute to effective self-regulation and development over the lifespan. So today we'll be discussing ageing well and what we can do to increase our chances of continuing to enjoy a good quality of life as we age. So first of all, to set the scene, most of us know that the Australian population is ageing, and to put that in context, in 2017, 15% of Australians, that is 3.8 million, were aged 65 and over, and this proportion is projected to grow steadily over the coming decades. This is partly due to an increase in life expectancy, and Australians now enjoy one of the highest life expectancies in the world. So according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, a boy born today would be expected to live to 80.9 years and a girl to 85. An important caveat to that is that Indigenous Australians, on average, live 10 years less for men and for women, so we certainly have a long way to go when it comes to closing the gap. As we age, biomedical risk factors such as blood pressure or insulin resistance increase, and these contribute to serious disease such as cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Also, behavioural or lifestyle factors play into disease risk, and these are things like physical activity, smoking, obesity, alcohol consumption. Recent data shows that only 35% of Australians over 65 are sufficiently active, and 72% are either overweight or obese. And whilst that's not ideal, on the upside, what it means is there actually are things that we can do to improve people's quality of life and their life expectancy. So let's dive into this with Associate Professor Tim Windsor. Today I'm here with Associate Professor Tim Windsor from the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work at Flinders University here in South Australia. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Amanda.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on Vibrant Lives podcast today. And I'd like to start our chat with some quick fire questions just to get to know a little bit about you outside your role as academic and researcher. So, Tim, where did you grow up?
I grew up on a sheep farm near Harden, which is a small town in southern New South Wales, in the Southwest Slopes area.
Oh, that must have been nice. Did you go to boarding school, or could you attend school there?
I did go to boarding school. We didn't live, it probably would have been an hour or so bus trip to town. So it wasn't an essential option to go to boarding school, but I did in fact go to Yanco Agricultural High School in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area of New South Wales.
I bet that was a nice place to grow up.
It was.
And Tim, your go-to meal for dinner?
Go-to meal? Well, I think a regular one is the standard roast chicken from the supermarket with salad. Not very adventurous, but very convenient.
Yeah, so nice and healthy and easy. And what are you reading right now?
Well, I have to confess to not reading a book right at the minute, but I am listening to an audio book, which is Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen.
Oh, right. Yes, I've read some of his books. He's a good writer, isn't he? Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He goes quite in depth into human aspects of human relationships and motivation, which, I think is interesting.
And Tim, what's your favourite form of exercise?
Well, my favourite form would be any sort of ball sport,
Right.
whether it's cricket or football or soccer. Not that I play many of those things these days, but I do a bit of running and go to the gym a bit, which is good. I do enjoy those things, but it's always more fun when there's a ball and teams involved, I think. So, they'd be my favourites.
Excellent. And your favourite or dream holiday destination in Australia and outside Australia?
Well, in Australia, I think would be the Northern Territory. I haven't been there, and I'd love to go to Uluru and Kakadu National Park. Yeah. So that would be the local destination. Internationally, there are lots of places I'd like to go, but probably the one that immediately comes to mind is Spain. I think I'd like to experience some of the culture there and some of the exotic things that Spain has to offer.
Yeah, so, and the wonderful food.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So, Tim, in the introduction, I set the scene for today's discussion with an overview of ageing in Australia. And as most of us are aware, the Australian population is ageing. So understanding factors that influence both ageing well and enabling people to continue to enjoy a good quality of life are really important to individuals and to society as a whole. So I thought it would be good for us to start with, the real basics to get an understanding of ageing. So, Tim, can you define for us or tell us what your understanding of ageing is? What's ageing?
It's one of those questions that seems like it should be really simple, but in fact it's quite complex.
Yeah.
There are a few different ways to think about ageing. We can think about it in simple terms of chronological age, which is just our time since birth. But really, chronological age is only a marker for the process of ageing because they're much more about biological changes. From a biological standpoint, ageing is more typically thought of in terms of the cellular changes and damages that accrue and accumulate over time, as well as losses in physical and mental capacity that occur from adulthood into later life.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that people can age at different rates? So someone might... Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, we would often think of biological age as potentially being quite different to chronological age. Someone who's very active and fit and healthy in their 70s might have the biological age of a 40 or 50-year-old, and someone who leads a very unhealthy lifestyle might have a much older biological age relative to their chronological age.
Yeah, and I guess we see examples of that all around us in society. So the other thing I'm really curious about this, and I'm not sure, I think there are various theories about this, but why do we even age? What's the function of aging for humans?
It's another question that I don't think is all that well understood. Most biological organisms do experience this process of senescence, the gradual deterioration of one's physical makeup. But interestingly, a couple of organisms have been discovered that apparently don't deteriorate in the way that most of us do. That things like Hydra, these tiny little jellyfish-like freshwater creatures that apparently have a capacity to regenerate stem cells that has no limit. So they can just keep going on. And there's another kind of jellyfish apparently that isn't subject to these normal processes of aging. It can detach and form a new little blob and regenerate itself. Right. So there are some exceptions, but I guess most biological things do have a finite lifespan. And there are different theories of why aging happens, from theories that are more concerned with potential programming of our biological systems, where we have this inbuilt lifespan that means we will experience cellular deterioration that's kind of pre-programmed, and there are also wear and tear theories that suggest that over time we simply wear out through use and environmental exposure. And of course, those things aren't mutually exclusive either. It may be that we kind of have a pre-programmed limit to our biological potential that can be accelerated by exposure to wear and tear. So,
yeah.
But in terms of a broader function of why we age, I'm not sure that that's very well understood.
No, I mean, I couldn't find a definitive answer for that when I was digging around. But mind you, I'd rather be a human that ages than a hydra, I think.
Me too, I think.
And just sort of leading on from that, so medical knowledge and technology has improved, as have our lifespans along with that. So where does it end? Do you think that there is a potential, or what is the longest lifespan you think that would be possible for humans? Do we know that, or is that even worth talking about?
Well, there was a study published in Nature Communications earlier this year, and a group of researchers looked at blood samples that were taken from a very large population of participants from different countries across the world, and they took these samples longitudinally. And I won't pretend to understand the science behind this, but the authors were able to analyse these blood samples in a way that gave them an opportunity to model how people could be expected to age over time in the context of different disease exposures. Mm-hmm. And what they came out with was an upper limit to the human lifespan of about 150.
Right.
So according to this, I guess the takeaway message from this is that we can certainly continue to improve our treatments of disease and our approaches to health. But even if we're able to intervene to cure all diseases and prevent those kind of normal or more commonly experienced aging-related health problems, we still have a point at about 150 where our bodies will wear out as a result of natural processes of aging, and that there's no real prospect of going beyond that unless we can find a way to intervene and actually change the aging process itself, which interestingly the authors suggest isn't necessarily they say there's no natural law that suggests that couldn't potentially be done. So I have no idea how it could be done, but that I think is kind of the state of the thinking at the moment.
It's a conundrum though, isn't it? I mean, I guess there's lots of ethical and moral questions that come into that. Do we even want to do that, et cetera, et cetera? But the other thing that's a little bit related to that is some people refer to ageing as a disease and implying that it could potentially be cured. So leading on from what you just said, do you think that's is that what's being spoken about? Is that
I think people are interested in that possibility. I don't know. I think we're a long way away from the potential likelihood of that happening in terms of the science, but it is something that people are interested in and are looking at, and perhaps there are some sorts of future ways of using gene therapies or something that might work to extend people's lifespans in a more dramatic way. But I think it's not something that's going to happen in our lifetimes.
Okay, so we don't need to worry about it.
I don't think we need to worry about it.
No. Good. So on to your area of expertise. As we've mentioned, the elderly are a growing proportion of our population here in Australia and in many countries like Australia. So ageing well is really important, and it's an interesting area of research, I think. So how on earth did you end up in this particular area, Tim?
Well, my background is in psychology. I did a PhD at the University of New England looking at aspects of people's social behaviour. And as part of that PhD, I was focusing on the transition from adolescence to adulthood and changes in the way people attribute cause and effect relationships and how that might influence their behaviour. And so my PhD work had a bit of a developmental focus, but not a focus that was specific to later life. And it was after finishing my PhD, I got a job at the Australian National University working in an ageing research unit as part of the Centre for Mental Health Research. And it was at that time that I applied, I guess, an interest that I already had in human development more into that specific area of later life. And it's for those reasons that you mentioned before, our ageing population, and the fact that this is a really topical and important area of study at this point in human history that made it one of particular interest to me.
I'd like to talk about ageing in a positive way, I guess. So let's talk about what we know about ageing well from a psychosocial point of view. So you've conducted some research into the importance of meaningful engagement for life in older adults. And can you explain to us what is meant by meaningful or purposeful engagement?
The way I see meaningful engagement is really in terms of people's scope to take part in activities that are imbued with a sense of purpose. So things that they find fulfilling and purposeful, and generally provide a sense of meaning in terms of their day-to-day lives, and are often activities that are also associated with positive emotions, although not exclusively. Sometimes things we do are very important to us that aren't necessarily fun or enjoyable, but are still meaningful and important. So generally those activities that provide a sense of purpose to our day-to-day existence.
So I guess then that can be, I guess, vastly different for different people, just like whatever age you are.
Most definitely. Yeah.
And I also read that there needs to be, or it's ideal if there's a degree of challenge in the activities that the elderly people undertake to keep them engaged and fulfilled. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, some of our research that we conducted looking at activities in very old adults focused on people's the degree to which they saw their activities as meaningful and challenging, and also their experience of positive and negative emotions around those activities. And we found that people reported high levels of positive emotion when their activities were rated as both high in meaning but also more challenging.
Right.
But we also found that they reported more negative emotion when their activities were higher in meaning and more challenging. So it wasn't really a clear-cut picture there.
I see.
It was a little bit complex in terms of the pattern of findings. But what I would say is that there's a strong evidence base that one of the psychological needs that we have that promotes a sense of well-being is the need for feelings of competence or mastery around the activities that we do. So it's quite well established that doing goal-directed activities where we can experience achievement and satisfaction out of attaining new goals seems to be important for maintaining a positive sense of self-image and positive emotions. So what would go along with that is that learning new things and challenging ourselves to some degree is likely to be a part of that, rather than just sticking with familiar routine activities that we're comfortable with. Having said that, we also know that stress is bad for us in a number of ways, apart from being unpleasant in and of itself.
Yeah.
Ongoing stressful experiences have negative effects on our bodies and our brains. So we want to avoid any kind of ongoing stress where we can, but at the same time, give ourselves the opportunity to learn new skills and challenge ourselves in ways that enable us to have that sense of achievement around our day-to-day activities.
So again, I guess that is very individual, depending on a person's level of, I guess, competence and various things. But also there must be, I guess, a sweet spot of challenge where it's not so difficult that it undermines how you feel, but difficult enough that you feel, as you say, like you've achieved something.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we're really interested in this area is how people regulate their goals in ways that allow them to, I guess, to find that sweet spot where as we age, we do experience some losses in aspects of our physical capacity, for example, or perhaps our cognitive capacity. And so things that or activities that may have provided that sense of meaning or purpose that we've undertaken in the past might come to a point where we can't do them anymore. So sporting endeavours might become untenable when we get older and don't have the same physical attributes that we once had. But of course, many people adapt to that very well by maybe disengaging with the goals around one certain sport, but then re-engaging with a new, less intense activity, whether that's moving from football to golf or from netball to bowls or whatever it might be. But you can apply those same sorts of processes right across all aspects of life in terms of how we actively engage with goals in ways that support our desire for mastery. But then an optimal situation is one where we can also flexibly disengage when the goals become too difficult to meet, but then re-engage with new goals that provide a better fit with our resources. And so we do see this ongoing process of goal management as we get older, and many older people get very good at managing their lives in ways that support those goals that provide a good fit with their resources.
That's really interesting, because I'm 50 now and I still have goals that I've had since my 20s in terms of running and various things I like to do. And the thought of not being able to do those things fills me with fear, I guess. But maybe as I get older, what I want to do will change. I guess it's all about adaptation, isn't it? And
it is, and it may be that it's not the time to let go of those goals for you just yet. But but maybe in 10 or 20 years things will be different.
Yeah. If we're talking about cognitive health as we age, could you give us some examples of some things that people can do as they're aging to maintain their cognitive health?
Yes. Physical health is really important for cognitive health, particularly heart health. So all of the things that people do to maintain a healthy heart, like regular exercise, good diet, avoiding smoking. If your heart's in good shape, then your brain's also more likely to be in good shape. So those things are all important. And also increasingly people interested in cognitive aging are emphasising the importance of staying intellectually engaged as we get older. And this has really come out of a lot of work over the last 20 years or so, which has supported this idea of brain plasticity, that our brains continue to be flexible, and we can generate new neurons, and even when we're getting older, and our brains seem to be capable of recruiting different neural networks to support particular cognitive tasks. And much of what we understand about cognitive aging has been changed by studies that have shown when autopsies are conducted on the brains of people who have died, sometimes people can have very substantial neuropathology associated with Alzheimer's disease, such as amyloid plaques, which is a known cause of Alzheimer's disease, and yet maintained very good cognitive functioning right up until they died. So it suggests that neuropathology alone isn't the determining factor for cognitive health. So that's, I guess, led to some optimism that there are lifestyle things people can do to maybe help to maintain cognitive functioning, even if they might be experiencing some neurological losses. And usually the types of activities that are suggested are around learning new skills and taking part in hobbies that are stimulating and require us to think in different and creative ways. So,
yeah, sure.
So it really adheres to a use it or lose it kind of philosophy that to give ourselves the best chance of staying cognitively healthy for as long as possible, we need to keep challenging ourselves with intellectually stimulating activity.
Yeah, I mean, that does make sense, doesn't it? It's like our muscles, use them or lose them. I think some of the things that I've heard suggested are learning a new language or doing crosswords, learning an instrument. I think even learning a game like chess or bridge or something like that,
Yeah.
I imagine would be
Yes,
good.
all of those things are good. And what we do know from the cognitive training literature is some of the there's a whole industry now around brain games and
Yes.
things that you can play in order to stay cognitively fit. And those things may be helpful to a degree, but the research is still sort of reaching a consensus on that. There's a little bit of uncertainty as to just how effective these things are, but what the research does seem to show is that participating in a particular kind of brain training will help you to get very good at the activity that you're doing, but those skills won't necessarily transfer into other domains. So it'll be interesting to see how the research literature around brain training develops over the next few years to give us a good sense of just how effective those sorts of things might be.
Yeah, that is very interesting because as you say that, I'm imagining those games you can perhaps download on your phone. I guess what's missing in that scenario is if you're learning something like the piano or going to a singing class, you're engaging with other people as well. So there's more going on. There's the learning plus the interaction. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
As we say, it's important to stay engaged and particularly, I believe, to maintain social engagement.
Yes.
But of course, for some people that's easier said than done, particularly for people who might be physically limited or lonely, for example.
Yep.
So what can be done then to facilitate or reduce barriers to engagement for elderly people?
Well, there's already a lot of really good work that's been done in the community. In South Australia, for example, local councils tend to be very proactive in supporting and offering programs to cater to the needs of older people who might be risk of social isolation. But there are always opportunities to do more. I think things like having well-designed urban spaces is important to enable people to get out and move around in their local environment safely, and where there's an opportunity for people of different generations to have contact with each other and create stronger communities. So that there's an element of urban planning to that, as well as, I suppose, an opportunity for building stronger communities through community initiatives. Also, reducing negative views of ageing at a broader social level, I think, is something that's going to be really important in the coming years. It's already important, but it'll become increasingly so with our ageing population. And it's interesting that of the various different kinds of discrimination we have in society, ageism seems to be tolerated more for some reason than other forms of discrimination. It seems to be more accepted and less challenged. And it's also the only form of discrimination that will ultimately affect all of us if we live long enough to reach old age. So it's in our self-interest to reduce ageist attitudes and ageist views, because we're all eventually going to get to a point where we'll be confronting those things.
Absolutely. I mean, we do live in a culture, I think, that glorifies youth. And no doubt, Tim, you've interacted with a lot of older Australians in your work. Do they anecdotally report experiencing ageism, and what are the kind of things that might happen?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, probably the best example I can give you is a recent survey we conducted in an area of Adelaide where we actually directly asked people about their experiences of ageism. We asked how often they'd been talked down to or discriminated against or abused or refused service, or those sorts of examples, because they were older. And the good news is that rates of those sorts of experiences were actually very low. Few people reported experiencing those more overt kinds of ageism, but I think often it's a much more subtle thing that maybe doesn't necessarily register when people are being asked directly about these clear negative experiences. But it's smaller things of just maybe perhaps feeling like one no longer has the confidence that they once had to participate in a social group, or feeling that maybe people would prefer if they weren't involved in activities because they're not seen as positively because they're older. And part of that, I think, relates back to this broader concept of negative stereotypes about aging, and is part of some work that has been done by Becca Levy and her colleagues at Yale University. And she talks about this notion of stereotype embodiment, where the idea is that from a very young age, we can be exposed to negative views of aging. And then as we grow older, eventually those views become self-relevant as we recognize ourselves as getting older. Suddenly these things that were about the external world suddenly become about us, and it can create negative views of aging and negative views of ourselves that can restrict us in terms of what we still might be able to get out of life, even into our later years. So yeah, I think it's trying to emphasize the positive aspects of aging, of which there are a number of things, is an important goal socially as individuals.
And I think in Australia as well, a lot of older Australians give enormously to the community in a volunteer capacity, and a lot of grandparents I know help with childcare and things like that, and some people would be lost without that kind of help.
Most definitely. Older adults make a massive contribution socially and economically, even once they're out of the paid workforce.
Yeah.
So, I think it's something that's very good and important to recognise.
Some of the research I believe you've done as well, Tim, is in relation to mindfulness-based meditation in older adults.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about what you looked at and what did you find in relation to that?
Sure. Well, I really have to give credit here to my postgraduate student, Leanne Marlowe, who was very much the driving force behind this work that contributed to her PhD project. But we focused on individual differences between people that reflected characteristics that we would associate with mindfulness and mindful behaviour. So mindfulness refers to the awareness that arises from being focused on the present moment in a non-judgmental way, and it's something that's often cultivated through meditation.
Yes.
And we found that compared to people in midlife, older adults tended to have higher levels of what we call trait mindfulness compared to midlife adults. We also found that mindfulness was more strongly related to some aspects of well-being among older relative to middle-aged people. We trialled an app. Many people are probably familiar with the Headspace app, which is a mindfulness meditation-focused app, and we trialled that with a group of older adults because there's been quite a bit of research done around the app, but not with an older group, and the results of that study showed that it was quite accessible and viewed generally positively by the older people that used it, who also showed some improvements in wellbeing over the course of using the app. And we also looked at moment-to-moment experiences of mindfulness in a sample of people where we used a method where people would get a smartphone, a text message multiple times throughout the day, and they'd answer one or two questions about what was going on during those moments. And we found that on moments when people reported higher levels of mindfulness, they also reported less negative emotional reactivity to stress when it occurred in those moments. And again, we found this age moderation effect where those stress buffering effects seem to be stronger among older relative to younger participants. When I say younger, I guess I'm talking about middle-aged people as opposed to older people.
Now, that's interesting. Well, one of the questions I'd planned to ask, but you've kind of already answered it, was, do you think we naturally become more mindful as we age? And I think it sounds like even without mindfulness training, that might be the case. And I'm interested that many cultures revere their elders. And I know in a lot of Asian cultures, for example, the elderly live with the family. And so that's a good way that we can help, or they're helped to be looked after. Do you think in Australia that, I know you talked about community initiatives, but do you think as a society we do enough to look after our older Australians?
In many ways, I think we could be doing a lot better. And I think the recent Royal Commission into residential aged care bears that out.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Identifying a lot of systemic problems and areas that need to be improved. So, yeah, there's a lot of great work being done, and a lot of individuals working in that industry and others who are doing really important and good work in terms of supporting older people. But without doubt, there's more that we could be doing, and I think it's just important to keep posing those questions and thinking about the different ways that, in a broad social sense, we can be having better intergenerational connections and more cohesive communities with older people, but also in those who are vulnerable, how we can do a better job of supporting and caring for those people.
Yeah. Tim, I understand that your parents are still alive, and are they living on the land still, or are they in a city, in a city?
They've moved into town, so they're no longer on the farm, but they're still living in Young, a country town in New South Wales.
Oh, right. And are they living independently?
They are, yes. Yes, they're now in their 70s and 80s respectively, but they're both doing well and living independently and hopefully for many years to come.
Yes, and aside from genes, which we can't control, just observing your own parents, what lifestyle factors do you think have contributed to their well-being as they're ageing?
I'm sure there are a lot of different and complex things, but just a couple that I suppose come to mind are that my mum's very socially engaged and intellectually engaged. She's part of a discussion group and who work through different topics of interest that has a strong intellectual component. They've both been volunteers in different organisations for many years, both before and after retirement. So they've maintained that civic engagement that I think is important. I'm sure Dad's many years of being a farmer has kept him pretty physically fit.
Yes.
Has also been a contributing factor. So like all of us, they're not perfect in every way, but they've done a lot of the things that we know can help to promote health and vitality into later life.
Yeah, I know. It's very important. Sadly, as most of us know, some people who maintain healthy and active lifestyles do end up succumbing to disease as they age, but this certainly doesn't mean we shouldn't aim to keep fit and engaged. Things.
Yeah, sadly that is true, and I suppose as individuals, all we can do is do our best to reduce our risk.
Yes, absolutely.
We do have a genetic makeup that constrains our potential, but there are still some things that we can do to optimise our individual circumstances.
Tim, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us about ageing. And just to wrap up, there's a few questions I really like to ask my guests. So, Tim, who inspires you?
It's a great question. A lot of people in my life inspire me. Some of my work colleagues and family and friends are inspiring just in the way that they seem to be able to tackle any obstacle that's put before them and keep moving onwards and upwards. But in terms of well-known people, someone that at the moment I'm finding strangely inspiring is, well, maybe not strangely, but it's a bit left field, but Ange Postecoglou, the Australian football coach who's got a job with Celtic now, a big European club, and he's gone into a pressure cooker situation of being expected to have immediate success and having to rebuild a team that was performing poorly under heavy media scrutiny, and he's done it in a very kind of he's done it his own way, and so far he's doing really well, and sticking to his guns, and he has his way of doing things, and he's just he's like AC/DC. I think he's hit a formula that works, and he's going to stick with it. But watching him has been an interesting ride. So yeah, he's someone that's, I guess, inspiring me at the moment.
Sounds like a real life version of Ted Lasso. I don't know if you've watched or heard that.
I'm not sure he's quite as sensitive and new age as Ted Lasso.
And finally, I like to ask all my guests, if you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be? Anything at all?
Yeah. Well, I think one is regular exercise. We all know we should do it, and some of us enjoy it more than others. But I think even if those who don't enjoy it almost always appreciate the benefits of it. So exercise, I think, is really important, and just making time to do or to engage in those simple pleasures of life that might not always seem that spectacular, but that ultimately sustain us, whether it's making time to go for a walk in nature, or reading a good book, or cooking something we like to eat, or I guess appreciating those small moments and ensuring that we do the things that sustain us.
I think that is something that as we get older, we get a lot better at doing.
Yeah, I think so too.
And Tim, if someone's interested in looking at the research and the work you're involved in, what's the best way for them to do that? Just
searching or Googling Tim Windsor in Flinders will bring up my website page on the Flinders University system, and they can go
have a look at what you're involved in, which studies, etc. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Tim, thank you so much for coming on Vibrant Lives podcast. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Amanda. I appreciate it.
And that was Associate Professor Tim Windsor sharing his knowledge about how to age well. It was clear from that discussion that looking after both our physical and cognitive health are equally important, as is social engagement. I was struck, but sadly not all that surprised to hear that ageism is more tolerated than other forms of discrimination. So the change starts with us. How about we start a micro movement by smiling at all the elderly people we see out and about in our communities? Thank you for tuning in today, and I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share the podcast and tell your friends about it. And if you could take a minute or two to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, it will help people find my podcast, and I'm always really grateful for that. Please follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast, or on Facebook at Vibrant Lives Podcast. And you can visit my new website designed by the very excellent people at Clever Fox Creative at www.vibrantlivespodcast.com. I really do love hearing from you, my listeners, so please email or DM me if you have any suggestions or any feedback, or would just like to say hi. That would be really lovely. So thank you so much for listening today. Eat well, move well, think well.